Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about variables and its naming, okay, and how they are used generally. So let's go ahead with this. So first thing I want to tell you about is most of the programming language, majority, okay, support much more data types than numeric and alphanumeric. We are only talking about numeric and alphanumeric because for convenience, okay. We are not going into other types, but in actual languages you will find more types than these two. But these are the basic types. So we will just use this to understand the procedural programming that we are trying to uh, do and see, okay. For our content to explain procedural programming and for simplicity reason, that's what I told you just now. We are only considering these two broad categories called numeric and alphanumeric data only. Okay, we are not going any further. But when you go into a particular language, you will find much more than these data types, because these data types are actually supported by whatever the language. Okay, that a particular computer language only supports them. So you can't talk about data type without talking about a particular language. Okay, so it is relevant to a language. So for our purpose, we are only trying to concentrate on numeric and alphanumeric data type, two types. So numbers, which can be arithmetically manipulated, all others which cannot be arithmetically manipulated as alphanumeric. So we just have those two categories of data type. Okay. So we will go and see some more about these variables. So first thing we will see is all programming languages such as, example, okay, C Sharp, Java, or Python, or whatever that you will come across, do not use the same variable naming rules. Again, these naming rules for the variables are relevant to that particular language. The language will tell you exactly how variables can be named in that particular language. So from language to language, this can differ. Okay. When you learn a particular programming language, you have to specifically learn the variable naming rules for that particular language. So if you are learning Java, you have to figure out what does Java allow you to do as naming variables, and accordingly only you can use them. If it is C sharp, you have to go and figure it out from C sharp. If it is Python, it's Python. So like that. Okay. So the naming rules can differ from language to language. Each language, in addition to that, you have to remember each language will have a set of words or names that are reserved by that language, because those words may be used by the language for doing certain things. And as such, we are not allowed to use those names as variables. In addition to the rules I told you about earlier, these reserved words, these are called reserved words. These reserved words also cannot be used as variable names. So the reserved word is not a common thing. C sharp will have its own set of reserved words. Java will have its own set of reserved words. Python will have its own set of reserved words. So in that particular language, you'll have to figure it out. Okay, so in that language, you cannot use those reserved word names as variable names. Okay, so that also just remember that. The variable naming rules we have mentioned in our previous lesson is only to introduce you to procedural programming language. This is our, we are used to set of rules saying, okay, this is what we are going to use for our understanding the procedural language, and this is how we are going to name the variables. And I have given you a set of rules. These is exactly what you need to follow. Now, this rule is just not a random thing. The rules I have entered there are majority of the languages support that rule. Okay, so we have taken variable naming rules that are supported by majority of programming languages. So remember, there may be few exceptions to what we have explained as the naming rules for our purpose. So for this particular lessons, you have to follow our rules. Okay, we are going according to our rules, and in our rules, we are not going to keep any reserved words. So, but just remember, when you are actually going into a programming language, there will be reserved words which you cannot use as variable names. Okay. As discussed in earlier lessons, we are told that variable names should be properly named. So let's see some more examples exactly what we mean by that. So let's go and look at some So we are talking about only two types of data: alphanumeric and numeric. So now we are going to look at alphanumeric valid variable names. Now I have, as you can see, I said it's valid. So whatever name I'm going to give you now are valid. Okay, there is no problem with the variable name. You can use it. It is allowed, but not necessarily appropriate. So let's see what does that mean. I'm saying it's valid, but may not be appropriate. Let's see what exactly that means. So let's take, suppose you want to keep someone's name. So, okay, we want to keep the name James in a variable. So basically you have to find a variable and give it a name. And then put the word James, which is our content, inside that variable. Okay. So let's put this into different types of names and see, just to get an understanding. Okay, now here I have created a variable called A and I have put the word James inside. This is valid. This is no problem. You can name a variable called A, right? If you go back and refer to our naming rules, it should start with an alphabet and continue with alphabet or number. No spaces allowed. So this is just a single letter A, so no problem, no issue. So in this variable called A, we have got the name James. That's what we are trying to store here. So that's one example. Or you can call your variable capital B. It doesn't matter whether you use capital or simple B, whatever is possible, because it's still starting with an alphabet, so no problem. And we have stored it. So this is one way to store. This is another way to store with a different name, variable name. This is another way. You can even call a variable XYZ1, because the main rule is it should start with the alphabet, continue with alphabet or numbers, and cannot have spaces in between. So this is valid, no problem. So this variable also contains James. So basically up to now A, B, X, Y, Z1, all three variables are having the same content, James. Okay, so let's see some more. We have created a variable called age and put James. This is also no problem. Even though age doesn't sound like a name, variable name for a name, this is no problem. This is valid. That's why I said you can use valid variable names, but it may not be appropriate. So this, in this case, is not appropriate. We'll come to that in a minute. But if you use this, there's no problem. See, why? Because we have started with an alphabet, continuing with alphabet or numbers. No issue. No spaces in between. So this is a valid variable name. And we have stored the word James. Now, if you look at any of these variables, these are all alphanumeric variables because they are storing alphanumeric data. So if the content is alphanumeric, then the variable is an alphanumeric variable. So A is an alphanumeric variable, B is an alphanumeric variable, X, Y, Z1 is an alphanumeric variable, age also in this case is an alphanumeric variable. It's valid. Okay, don't forget that. It's valid. If the computer won't interpret the word age and say, that's an age, cannot store a name inside that, nothing like that will happen. They have given a naming rule convention. If you follow the convention, you can give any word here as long as it's valid and you are following the rules, it will just take it. And if you store alphanumeric constant inside that, like in this case James, then the variable will be known as an alphanumeric variable. So all four are alphanumeric variables. So let's see some more alphanumeric variables. Here's another one. I have created a variable called address. That's also no problem because it's starting with an alphabet, continuing with alphabets. So no spaces in between, no issue. This is a valid variable name, no issue. I have stored the word James inside that. So this variable is also known as alphanumeric variable because the content is a alphanumeric content. We are only talking about two contents, no, numeric content or alphanumeric content. Content that can be arithmetically manipulated, content that cannot be arithmetically manipulated. So James, you can't do anything with arithmetic. So it's an alphanumeric. So these all five are alphanumeric variables. These ones, okay? This is the content. It's the constant. Now here I have created a variable name called invalid. Now whether you're giving a name like these are okay or not, whether it is good or not is a different issue. But as long as validity is concerned, these are all valid. Even though the name says invalid, this is a valid variable name because it's starting with the alphabet I this is not 1, this is I. If it's starting with 1, then you can't use it. A variable cannot start with a number. It should start with an alphabet. So in this case, it's starting with I. I is a alphabet, okay? And rest are all alphabetic characters. So this is a valid variable name, even though the name of the variable is invalid. This is a valid variable and we have put James. And since it's alphanumeric content, invalid in this case, okay, even though the word sounds very bad, invalid is a valid alphanumeric variable name. Okay, some language may not allow this because it's reserved word. That's a different matter. If it is a reserved word, remember, like I told you earlier, reserved words also cannot be used. So in our situation, we are ignoring the reserved words. So if we are ignoring the reserved words, we don't have a particular language. No, we are going to do this in a general term. So because of that, the word invalid is a valid alphanumeric variable, and we are having James inside that, and therefore this variable is a alphanumeric valid variable. Okay, address is also a valid variable. Right. Error. This again, in some languages, this may be a reserved word and you can't use it as a variable name. But for our purpose, we are not, like I told you, we are not concentrating on any reserved words. So in that case, starting with an alphabet and the rest alphabet is a valid variable name. Even though the word says error, this is a name of a valid variable. And since we have stored James, which is an alphanumeric content, this error variable in this case is also an alphanumeric variable. Okay, let's see another variable. Now we are given another variable and we are named it name, and we have put James. So this is again name starting with an alphabet, continuing with alphabets, and therefore it's a valid alphanumeric variable. Why? Because we have stored James, which is alphanumeric content. Another one, person name. So when you are giving names like this, with person name like that, usually we put the first letter of the first word in capital and the other word also capital, so that it's easy to read. Okay, and you can't have spaces. Remember, variable names are not allowed to use spaces. So if you create a variable like person name with first letter alphabet and the rest are all alphabet, it's fine. This is a valid variable name. Okay, so basically all of these are valid alphanumeric variable names. All these top ones, because all of them are containing the word James, which is an alphanumeric constant. Okay, so these are all alphanumeric variables. So now let's see something more about this. Is it okay to use a name like this? Now when somebody says A,